All right, so we have here the O2R PDF. You can find it on Canvas. So we're going to start with the meter bridge up top. There's our meter bridge. And in here you have different parts here, and you can see across the top it shows you the different layers 1 through 24, 25 through 48, and the master layer. So the remote layer provides different fader control and Pro Tools and DAWs and stuff like that. I just had to believe. I believe. So you push the buttons up here. So you got the buttons up here. You've also got the buttons down on the console down here. These buttons up here only change the meter, what we're seeing in the meter. The buttons down on the board itself, on the main part of the console, actually change both the faders and the meter bridge. So if you push the buttons on the console, it's going to change both. But if you just want to, like, let's say you want to control channels 25 through 48, but you want to see your input path. If you want to control your monitor path but see your input path meters, then you can push 1 through 24 on the meter bridge section and it will change that for you. There are 3 input metering positions. Pre-EQ, pre-fader, and post-fader. These positions are only for the input channels. And then you have the peak hold function that displays the peak that go into the red overload LED segment. Keep in mind that 0 equals -60 dBFS. So it's a little bit different from just your regular 0. So you're probably not going to hear the clip when you see the clip on there. And the over LED represents digital clipping and or distortion. So just be careful there. If it says over, when you see that red button there, you're going to get digital clipping, but that 0 that's right beneath it, this one here, it's actually not going to show us, it's not going to have digital clipping. The control room button is used to display the level of the control room in the stereo meters. Basically, you can use that if you want, but you don't have to use that. There we go. And the output metering position here is for the output channels only. It's for our buses 1 through 8, pre-EQ, pre-fader, post-fader, same basic thing. Okay. Again, this stuff will become a little bit easier once you do start using the O2R. All right, our display access window over here on the left-hand side. We have some things here that show us our metering. For example, if you want to see your metering on the O2R, this is a very important one. You can select you can see your input channels, your bus outs, your aux sends, your stereo outs, your effects processors. The meter button is going to be very important. These can all be metered on the various meter pages, which are located by using the display access meter button. Input and output channel meters pages also display fader buttons positions numerically. And the peak hold function, which applies to all level meters, can be turned on or off on any of the meter pages. So this is what this is going to look like. Meter pages are located using. Then we have here input and output channel meter pages also display fader positions numerically. And here we can see what's going on. You can move your pre-EQ, pre-fader, post-fader. You can move where things are going to be using this page here if you don't want to use the buttons up top. I recommend just using the buttons up top, but you could do it in here as well if you want to see things a little bit easier. So see here, the pre-EQ comes before your gate, EQ, or your delay, and the gate can be a gate or compressor. The pre-fader comes after those, and the post-fader comes after everything, comes after your fader. And then the output section, pre-EQ, pre-fader, post-fader, set up like this, so you can see how things are going here with your inputs and outputs. If you have channels 1 through 24, 25 through 48, 29 through 46, 56, then you're going to see a whole bunch of, you're going to see the graphs look like this, your meters look like this, and they're on the window in front of you. This is so you can see a whole bunch of stuff all at the same time. If you want to look at all 48 of your channels, you can see all 48 of your channels and you can look at how this works. And you also have up top, you have your gate gain reduction and your compression gain reduction. So you can see your gain reduction for stuff too. If you remember, you have to use your arrow keys in the bottom right hand corner, this section over here. Use these arrow keys to navigate to all these different places. So you can navigate, you can hit the enter key and turn these on. So by default, it's going to show you the level, what your levels are happening. but you can also set up your gate gain reduction to see your gate gain reduction, or your compression gain reduction if you want to see what your compressors are doing there. Bus outs, aux ins, and stereo out can all be metered on the master meter page. So you got this stuff here, master meter, effects 1 through 4, stereo, positions, stuff like this. And you can just see a general, like what's happening with different things. So for example, if you're not hearing an effect and you think you should be hearing an effect, you could check your aux outs to make sure that you're actually sending that signal to that effect. So you can also see effect 1 through 4, here's your effects. So we can see our inputs and our outputs, what's happening. So if you go over here and you're not seeing anything from effects 1, 2, 3, or 4, there's nothing going on the input side of things, then that means that no signal is going to it. So that means you've got a mistake somewhere else. Remember, a lot of this stuff is really about understanding where you can do, how you can troubleshoot and seeing where problems are happening. So that's what your effect 1, 2, 3, and 4 inputs would be for, to make sure that you're actually getting signal into your effects. And if you are getting signal into your effect, but you're not getting any signal out of your effect, then you need to check a different section to see about troubleshooting. Then finally, you've got a stereo meter here. Stereo out meter can be metered on the stereo meter page. Peak level signals for the left and right channels are displayed numerically, so you can see exactly what's going on here. So you just see a lot more information here. All right, AD input section. The AD input section here is this part right here. And you have your mic pre inputs. You got 16 of those, and each one has 48 volts phantom power, and has a minus 26 decibel pad. So you can pad it by 26 decibels if it's too loud, like a snare drum or something like that. Then you can also turn up your mic pre input there and set your levels. You have 24 line inputs, so across everything you've got 24 line inputs. And you have your dedicated line inputs over here, channel 17 through 24. You have min and max gain ranges from minus 16 decibels to plus 60 decibels. It's quite a lot of gain stage for these here. And then you also have 16 analog inserts here. The analog inserts are right across the bottom. You can put those into your setup here. Your signal LEDs to light up at 20 decibels below 0, and the peak signals light up at 3 decibels below clipping. So when you're hitting peak, you're not quite peaking yet. It's actually 3 decibels down from peaking, but you're almost about to peak, so be aware. This is the signal structure for everything, how we come in here. And I just want y'all to take a look at this because I really want y'all to see how this happens with your analog to digital conversion right here. So this part here, let's see if we can get it to be bigger. No, okay, that's fine. So we have our input over here, which is A and B. A is XLR and B is 1/4 inch. And then over here you have your pad, and then you have your phantom power here, so it can get your power in there, 46 dB, or 46 volts rather. And then over here you have your insert. If the insert is on, it's going to go through this insert section here. Notice this is still analog. We have not changed to digital yet. After the insert, then what happens is it goes in here to our AD converter, and the AD converter now brings it into the board. And that's when it goes to our talkback section. Once we get it into the board, into the console itself, then we can route the audio through anywhere that we want to. Down here we have the input for our, we have the input for our 1/4 inch here. There's 8 of those. There's no insert. There's no phantom power, none of that stuff. So you really just have the gain knob here, and then you get to your gain. And then after that, you can go to your talkback, go through you can see the peak signal there, and then you also see your AD in. So there's a shorter trip for the 1/4 inch stuff. Just notice though that your inserts here in the 1 through 16 are before the digital conversion. And that's really important because after we convert it into digital, we don't want it to convert back to analog again, and we don't want to keep converting back and forth from analog to digital, because every time you make that conversion, things are going to get maybe a little bit weird sounding or a little bit off. Not anything you'd really notice too much, but it does affect the signal. The O2R has very good analog to digital converters, but depending on which model you get, some of those might be a bit older, some of them might be a bit newer. So obviously the newer ones are probably going to be a little bit better than the older ones, just depending on what kind of parts and stuff they use. So you don't want to convert back and forth too much, and that's why we want to keep the signal as digital from our console into the computer. We want to keep that digital the whole way through, because it doesn't really do us any good to change it back into analog and then change it back into digital and then come back out, change it back to analog, change it back to digital. So at that point, what we're hearing is 4 times it's been converted back and forth, and that's really going to change that signal a bit. So we want to make sure that once we get it into digital, we keep it in digital. So here's another little diagram of how our setup is set up at SAE. Just keep in mind that the Sapphire is now the HD, Pro Tools HD. It's not a Sapphire system any longer. So what happens is we have our analog to digital 1 XLR. It goes in here, 1/4-inch insert. So this is our 81 section here, and it goes into the pad, goes into the gain. And this part here is all analog. Then it gets changed into digital right here after the gain. It goes to our fader, goes to our output, goes to the audio interface, goes into the computer, into logic on a fader here, 1 in, 1 out, comes back out to our card again, slot 1, 1, output, it goes into channel 25. So the input is channel 1, the output is channel 25. So our input path is channel 1, our monitor path would be channel 25. Now, this can get a little bit confusing because they're on the same channel. So it's really easy, and this happens to me all the time, is that I tend to think about the O2R as kind of an inline console, but it's not an inline console. The O2R is a split channel console. Channels 1 through 16 are the input path. Channel 25 through 48 are the monitor path. That's really important to keep in mind, because you want to differentiate between the monitor path and the input path, especially when you're talking to other people. Because if you were talking to somebody else and you'd say, turn up channel 25, you mean the monitor path. Like if you have a vocal on your channel 25, that would be your monitor path. But if you said turn up channel 1, that's going to be your input path. Make sure you say what you mean. Because if you're looking at it and it's on channel strip number 1, it's on fader number 1 there, well, that could be 2 things. That could be channel 25 or it could be channel 1. So make sure you say what you mean. I oftentimes finding myself getting confused or saying the wrong thing because I'm looking at the wrong place on there, or I'm just thinking about it in some kind of weird way. So don't fall into the trap that I've fallen into. The reason why I still do that is because I learned it incorrectly when I was learning it before. I actually learned how to use the O2R in 1997 with the very first O2R that was released. And the way I learned it was they stuck me in a room at my school, they gave me the manual and they said, learn it. And I learned it. I had to learn it. I just learned it on my own because there wasn't anybody who knew it at the school at the time. It was so new that even the people who taught the school didn't know how to use it. So I had to learn it on my own. And it wasn't until later that I actually realized that I was kind of internalizing it incorrectly, just because all I had was the manual to go off of, and I was like, I'm not terribly super smart, so I was like jumping ahead in the manual and all this stuff and kind of like trying to do it without the manual, which is a big mistake. All right, our selected channel selection section. This is what it looks like as a nice little display here. Trial and error learning. Yeah, I don't recommend it. Not for this, anyway. It's nice to have somebody to point you in the right direction and think about things the right way. All right, so routing the input channels. Each input channel can be routed to the bus out, stereo out, or its own direct out. So 1 through 8, those buttons route the currently selected input channel to the bus outs. The stereo button routes the currently selected input channel to the stereo out, and the direct out button routes the currently selected input channel to its own direct out. Follow pan, whoops, I keep moving that because I want to go down. Follow pan determines whether the input channel's pan control setting is applied to the bus outs. When it's off, the levels of the signal fed into the odd and even outputs is the same, and when it's on, the levels of the signal fed into the odd and even outputs follow the pan control on the top of each channel. So basically what happens is when you push the routing display button, you get presented with a screen that looks like this. You can see on the screen every single channel. So you can see everything all at once, but what you're actually controlling with that selected channel section is just the one at a time. Open the routing window, display window by pressing display and then in the selected channel routing section. So you can see here, by default, they're all gonna say stereo. Now, keep in mind, this is different from the audient. The audient every channel, you had to push the mix button to get it to send to your mix. The O2R is not set up like that. The O2R is set up by default. You can automatically hear the signal coming through. So as soon as you turn up that fader, you should be able to hear a signal happening. You should be able to hear it. If you don't want to hear it, you push that stereo button. So on here, we have the pan button on top. Again, that's in by default. You have 1 through 8, which is our buses. You have stereo, which is the stereo mix. And you have direct. The D is direct. That's set up for going to your DAW. Use the arrow buttons in the parameter wheel to select the parameters, and use the enter button or increase decrease button to set them. Again, we're talking about this section down here in the lower right hand corner. I'm just going to show you here a little bit bigger, like that. Okay, that's what they're talking about, the arrow buttons. You can see right down here on the side. See the arrows right over here. Okay. We have a couple buttons across the top. If you want to select these buttons, you can set them all to stereo, you can set them all to bus, or you can set them all clear. All stereo assigns all input channels to the stereo out. All bus assigns all input channels that are currently displayed to all bus outs. And all clear, this button clears all routing assignments that are currently displayed. So you can quickly navigate around and do stuff really, really quick, which is really nice. Okay. The stereo button routes the selected input channel to the stereo out, and the direct button routes the selected channel to its direct out. That's if you want to record into Pro Tools. The surround mode is not commonly used, but we can configure it to have an active surround outputs from either the buses, slots, or the Omni outs. So depending on how you have it set up, it can go out of your bus outs, it can go out of your slot outs, one of the cards, or it can go out of the Omni outs, depending on how you have stuff set up. So surround mode, generally you're going to see it's going to say stereo. The phase insert button in the upper right hand part here is used to select the input channel phase and insert pages. And then the delay button is used to select the delay pages, and you can go back and read more about that in the manual. But basically, these here, we're not really going to use these too much, and you're really not going to use this little joystick right here. Okay, when you're in your phase button here, use the cursor buttons or parameter wheel to select normal or reverse phase. Press the enter button and increase buttons to set them. And you can also set global. You can reverse everything, all your input channels, to reverse the phase simultaneously. Again, not really something you're going to do too much. What can be assigned to inserts? You can assign input channels, bus outs, aux sends, and the stereo out all have assignable inserts. So these channel inserts here, you can have a compressor, you can have an insert here like this, and you can set what it is, where it is. Okay, so this picture here shows the insert page for the bus outs and the aux sends and the stereo out right here. Okay, we have channel inserts and we have aux inserts set up slightly differently. See how they're set up here. Insert, pre-EQ, pre-fader, all this stuff here. You can see how this is set up a bit differently on each one. Okay, so what you do to use insert is you use the layer buttons to select your layers, and use the select button to select the channel. So the layer button is right here, and your select channel button is right here. And it's going to show you across the top up here what you're actually controlling. So that'll change. It'll say channel 1, channel 2, channel 3. So always make sure that you're looking at the right thing. Remember, stop, look, execute. Okay. And then we can turn that insert on and off by using the on-off buttons right in here. All right, so we can select the destination for the insert out, where you want the insert out to go. It can be a slot output, Omni out, 2-track digital output, or the input to an internal effects processor, wherever you want it to go. And then we can select the source. Inserts can be the AD input, slot input, 2-track digital or analog, or output of an internal effects processor. So you can have a couple ways to set this up. Compressor on, this turns the currently selected channel's compressor on and off. It works in unison with the selected channel dynamics comp on button. And so you're not really, if you want to turn that compressor on, what we've got here, you do not need to do that in this screen. You can do it in the screen, but you do not need to do it in the screen. There's actually a dedicated button for that. And in the order, you can put the parameter, set the order of the insert and the compressor to either comp insert or insert to comp. So basically, if you want the compressor to come before your insert, you can set that, or vice versa. If we're doing panning stuff, you can use the pan control to pan the currently selected input channel. So you push the pan button here, and it's going to show you this screen here. This screen here. Now you notice on the screen, there's little hearts here. Well, this is for when these channels are paired together. We're going to come back and talk more about that later. I just wanted to kind of point it out because it's going to be really useful. And I think we're going to talk about it like right now, actually, if I remember the order of this PDF. Yep, right now. So the panning modes. There are 3 types of panning modes. When you pair two tracks together, you pair them together. The way that you do it is you hit the select button. Let me show you. You see the select button here. Well, I would hold down one. While I'm holding it, I push the other one. So I hold it down and I push the other one while it's held down. And that way it's going to group them together. They're going to be paired together and they're both going to be lit. Now one's going to be solid and one's going to be flashing. The one that's flashing is the one that's not selected, I think, and the one that's solid is the one that is selected currently. So you're only really seeing your selection for one channel at a time, but when they are paired together, it actually controls both channels at the same time for things like EQ and the compressor. Now, for panning, there are actually 3 different types of panning modes, and we can get to that right here. See where it says mode up top? Well, that right now it's set for individual mode. It means that everything is going to be its own individual panning. So with these here, 3 and 4 and 5 and 6, these are paired together, but they're still going to be individual. But if I go down here to gang or inverse gang, the gang mode is going to be your input channel. The pan controls operates both of them at the same time, but they're in unison. So if I turn one to the right or one to the left, they're both going to turn to the left or right. But if I select inverse gang mode, the channel pan controls operate in unison but move in opposite directions. So if I turn one, it's going to flip them to be opposites from each other. Okay, then we have our aux send pan controls can be linked to input channel pan controls, and then operating an input channel pan control also operates the corresponding aux send pan control and vice versa. So this kind of just shows you what's going on here. All right, if I want to use my compressor in here, we use the selected channel dynamics comp on button to turn the selected channel's compressor on or off. Every channel has a compressor. Every single of those 56 channels has a compressor and also has an EQ. Use the layer buttons to select your layers and use the select button to select the channels. That's really important. Make sure you always think, look, execute. Think, I want to compress channel 25. You look at the layer 25 to 48, make sure that button is pressed, and then you look at the selected channel button, make sure channel 25 is selected, and then it's going to go ahead. Use the selected channel dynamics display button to locate the comp library page. So if we want to look at our different library for our compressor, we can do that in here. You just push this display button right here, and then it brings you into this page on your window, and you can use those using the scroll wheel or the arrow keys and increase and decrease and enter keys and all that stuff. You have 3 different options here: recall, store, or clear. So you can recall ones, you can store them, or you can clear them. And the R means it's like one that's set. You can't do anything to that one. Okay. Current type, this indicates the current compressor type in the currently selected channel. This is the curve of the currently selected channel. Over here is your gain reduction meters. Then you have your type of curve. Here you can check that: comp, expand, comp hard, comp soft, so you can change how it's compressing. This is, if you understand it, it's basically like the knee in your compressor. The curve of the currently selected memory is displayed to the right of the memory list. So you can see that right there. Yep. All right, and then you can, like I said, you can select your library titles here. All right, so here's just general overview of the controls. If you like this better than my window my picture that I had for you, you can use this. We're not going to go over this again because it's literally just the same as what we did in the very beginning of class. Same thing with this rear panel selection. Here's a couple of options for different slot types, so you can have slot cards. Here we've got 1 through 8 and 9 through 16. This is basically what we have at school. This is the one we've got at school right here. All right, in the back of the board, it just looks like this. You've got your number 1 is your input XLR and 1/4 inch. Remember that 1/4 inch inputs are priorities over XLR. When you patch into the line input, the XLR input will be cut on that channel. And then Number 2 over here is our insert connectors for 1 through 16. Only 1 through 16, not 17 through 24. In our analog master out section, again, I'm not going to go through all this because you've already seen it and you can read it yourself. Same thing with all this stuff. Selecting layers we already talked about. All right, and here is more stuff about our AD input section and our input section for our 17 through 24. And this are our encoders. Again, our channel strips here. You got the encoder up top, the auto button for automation, select button, solo button, on, off, stuff like that. All right. Here you got the display, the contrast control, the F1 through F4 buttons, the tab scroll button, the right tab scroll button, and you've got your effects plugin stuff across the bottom and your parameter controls here. So these are all kind of connected up here. All these different sections here, which we've already talked about at one point or another today. All right. We're not going to talk about the sending bus outs to the stereo out right now. I want to come back and talk about that. Input patching, not something I really want you to mess with at SAE. You can actually change your input stuff like that, input routing, but I recommend that you don't really mess with it too much unless you really have a reason to. Setting the aux send mode, again, we'll come back and talk about that. Send levels using the encoders. Just remember that you've got your encoder mode and you've got your fader mode. The encoder mode can change between panning and aux. If you want to use panning mode or aux mode, you can do that there. Definitely worth trying out. I recommend using, for me, I like to use the aux sends from the fader, not from the encoders. I just leave my encoders set to be the pan, not the aux sends as well. And you'll kind of see why once you start to mess with it. Pairing channels by using the select buttons. Only horizontal panning can be set using these select buttons here. So in here, okay, when you go to display input patch section, wait, no, not that one. This one here, I think is your control section. I'm not exactly sure where this one is set up, or maybe the output section on the right-hand side of the board. I think it's over here. I always kind of forget about this because this one doesn't really say, but I think it's in the monitor display section. I think. I might be wrong, or maybe it's in the routing section. I'd have to push the button to make sure about which one it is right now, so I can't really remember that off the top of my head. But once you get into your pairing mode, you can pair these together. You can turn them into pairs or not pairs, separate mono ones. Right now they're all set for separate mono, but you can see the little broken hearts, which is really cute and sad at the same time. But you can also push the button to pair them up, and that'll make this heart full again. But the way I do this, and the reason why I always forget about this, is because I don't do it like this. The way I do it is I push one select button and I push the other one. I hold one and then push the other one, and be very deliberate about it, and they'll both kind of light up there. Okay. The solo section here, the one thing I do want to say about the solo section is that you can solo safe stuff in here. So you see where it says solo safe. If you turn solo safe turn it off, I think it's here, you can actually go through here. You can select which button you want to use and solo safe each one here. So use your monitor display button to locate the solo setup page, and you can go through and you can solo safe certain channels. What I recommend, Crispy says, heart stereo, no stereo. Don't want to have a heart and do stereo to monitor pair tracks. Well, what it doesn't really matter if it's stereo or not. That's not what the heart is showing us. The heart over here is really just showing us if they're paired together. So you can have two tracks and have them be left and right, but not paired together. This just makes it easier to control both your tracks at the same time. The main thing that we pair things for is so that we can apply an effect like an EQ or a compressor to both channels at the same time. Also, when you have them paired together, you move one fader and it actually moves both faders automatically. So one looks like a ghost is moving it because they're connected up together. If you turn your if you turn the encoder knob for panning, it'll also turn them separately if you set up that inverse gang mode. But the main thing that we're going to be pairing things together is so that they use the same EQ and same compressor, so you don't have to set a EQ or compressor twice. One thing that's not so great about the pairing mode, when you pair them, if you need them to be set slightly off from each other, when you pair them, they actually go to exactly the same spot. So if you pair them together, but you want them to be separated out, what I do is I set my pair, turn my pair on, and I set up my EQ or compression for them, so I only have to do it once, and then I unpair them. It'll retain the EQ and compressor settings, but now I can actually move them slightly differently from each other. And that's really what that pairing is for. The pairing is more for your effects than it is for your EQ or, for your level or your panning. All right. If we want to assign different parameters to the encoder mode, assign buttons, you can sign up your input patch or your direct out, something like that. So you go over here to the display button and you can assign whatever one you want. Okay, you can set it for different things here. Insert on, phase, direct out, insert patch, insert in patch, input patch, attenuator, or no assignment. I think by default they're set up for no assignment at SAE. All right, and then we're going to skip this last part here, and this is like a breakout from just certain things in the manual and certain things on there. It's just like the more important parts of this whole thing. That's all that is.